Good evening, everyone, and welcome to this week's live stream. Thank you all for being here. For those of you that don't know me, my name is Scott, and I'm from Property Investment Advisory. To those that do, hello. Today's a special live stream because we're going to be talking about a really important topic. So I guess to get things underway and move things along, I'd like to introduce you all to Tony again. Tony from AV Chartered Accountants, and hand you over to him.
Thanks, Scott. Welcome, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here once again doing this live stream, and it's my pleasure this afternoon to interview Justin Williams, who's from Boyd Conveyancing Services. I'm sure you see the site. We're going to talk about all things legal, all things that can probably go wrong in the contract. So let me start by asking you, now it says conveyancing services. What's the difference between a conveyancer and a solicitor, and what sort of things should people look at as to when they choose where to go to have their property purchase looked after?
Okay, all right. So first of all, thanks for having me. Pleasure to be here. And look, conveyancer, solicitor, difference being conveyancer is doing property or specialising in property 24/7. That's what we do every day of the week. So generally, if you call through, got a question, you're going to get a hold of your conveyancer, whereby a difference with a solicitor, they don't always say specialise in the one area. Yep. So they might be conveyancing, court, workers' compensation, etc. So they may be spread across a number of different areas, whereby that call goes to, say, a paralegal, etc., that has to wait to get you the advice that you might want. Yep. Whereby we're there, ready to go, generally straight away.
I've had experience in that matter where there's been some urgent things and some
hard to track down.
They're always in court, so it's something that it's a great distinction to make. Right from day one, the purchase of the property, from where I sit as an accountant, getting the name right on that contract is crucial. That's what we get involved in, because as we know, paying stamp duty is quite expensive if you get it wrong.
And you've got to do it twice.
And you've got to do it twice. So that's the last thing people want. How much do you get involved when you look at when you're told this is going to go in that person's name, and what sort of questions do you ask to tease around getting the right name on the contract to start with?
So depending on what type of matter it is, if say it's just a residential and it's just going to be in the name of mum and dad, generally we've got to go through what's called a verification of identity process, whereby clients have to come in, you've got to meet the client face to face, or in the COVID age now via Zoom, but they still have to send in, say, driver's licence, passport, birth certificates, Medicare cards, so you can know who the client is you're dealing with. One, to make sure the name goes on the contract correctly, and you've done everything that's right to keep the exchange settlement system through PEXA in order. Okay, so there's no fraudulent dealings, etc.
Right.
Okay.
I guess the question also was from the point of view of getting the right name on the contract from a proof of identity point of view, but also just getting it right from an asset protection point of view. So if you look at something and you see that they're going to put it in the name of
company,
stereotypically the husband, which is and they're the at-risk person because they might be running a couple of businesses. Run through the conversations you might have around sort of asset protection, not putting it in someone's name who might be the at-risk
generally
person.
What we'll do is they'll come through, they'll have an idea to say we will need to purchase, or we're looking at purchasing this type of property, and we'll go, right, how would you like to go about that? If they then come down and then start to talk that route, generally we'll work closely we'll have referrers that we work with, so accountants, etc. So we'll make sure that if that is the case and they're doing it, as you said, for asset protection reasons, that they've spoken to the accountant as to what needs to be done, and we'll work with the accountant as well to make sure that what they're conversing with the client is with us. We've got something in writing, so we know that contract's where it needs to be.
Yeah. One of the things that I often see, you mentioned companies, and it often intrigues me that company names go on the name of contracts, but there's a trust underneath it.
Yes.
And there's a trap with trusts around land tax. Do you want to talk a little bit about that as well?
So, look, if we're going company route again, working with the accountant, the client will often come in and say, look, I'm going to buy the property and I want to buy it as ABC 1, 2, 3, and we're also going to put it in a trust. So you've got to be very, very careful. So for that trust, what goes on the front page of the contract? So again, you'd go through and do, again, searching. So checking company through ASIC to make sure that everything's
Exists.
correct.
Yep.
Back with the accountant again, have you set up the trust deed?
Yep.
Because very, very important. Trust deed has to be in place before we exchange contracts.
Yep.
If not, can be very, very dangerous. So we'd make sure that we've got a copy of that trust deed in place. It's sitting there. Everything they're trying to do matches under the deed, allows them to do what they're wanting to do. So it is a varied process.
You mentioned names. Now, some people who know me know that I have an Italian background, so a lot of my clients are Italian. I grew up playing soccer with the Greeks. Their names are varied. And one of the things that I have noticed is how tight things have become around names. So, for example, someone who might be called Giuseppe and has gone through his entire life being known as Joe, and that's what we know him as, and that's what's on our system. Next thing you know, he tries to buy a property, and there's all sorts of proof identity documents. Have you had or issues? We've had a lot of those problems where they've had to go right back to birth certificates. Have you seen processes where a purchase of a property has been held up because of someone's name and misspellings?
Yes. I had one recently whereby we had a lady who was moved over here now. She was a permanent resident and had moved across from America. And she had, for whatever reason, arrived, put all her documents in when she moved over here to have the licence done, etc., and changed her middle name. For whatever reason, who knows? But we had to go back and get all of her American documents, find them, put them together, stat decks done on one and the same person to confirm, just to make sure everything was in place. So it is, verification of identity is very, very much key.
That's very important.
And I guess, sorry, just one thing
you're right.
while we're on the topic there is talking about getting things right and how important it is and critical from the start. You probably come across all sorts of different situations and cases, but I mean, how important is it to get it right from the start? I mean, if someone's made maybe a mistake in terms of something in the contract, a clause, spelling an entity, is that easily fixed? Is it not easily fixed? Is it costly?
Not easily fixed, can be costly, so the front end of the conveyance is very important, and I cannot stress or say that enough. If everything's done at the front end, before, say, exchange, when the matter becomes legally binding, then the back end, settlement, etc., generally flows very, very smooth. So it's making sure that before you bind anyone legally, everything's in order. You get it right at the front, the back end's very, very smooth.
I had an interesting one years ago where I had a client that had owned a property in a company name, and the company had been struck off 15 years earlier, so the company didn't exist. And if you know the rules around that, the property is actually owned by ASIC, so it was a lot of legal work to get the company reinstated so that they actually owned the property. You mentioned this acronym PEXA. We love acronyms. Tell us about PEXA. So we've gone away from a paper system now to an electronic exchange system. Explain how that's made a difference. All right. Good and bad.
I see it generally good.
Yep.
It's now, we're probably been, say, majority, so I think about 80-85% of all transactions now are electronic, so all up in the cloud. So PEXA being Property Exchange Australia. So good being, especially with what's happened recently with COVID and everyone being shut down, sent home. Yep. The old settlement rooms where everyone would go to the city, or say Newcastle city agents, etc. You wouldn't or weren't able to do that. So all of a sudden, by having that electronic base, kept the property market alive and moving.
Yeah, right.
It's been very good. It's you don't have to leave the office. You can do everything now from your computer screen. You've got good give and take with banks, whereby before you'd spend your day 3-4 hours sitting on the telephone to have a conversation with the bank to say, look, is this up to date? Have you got this document, etc.? Now you can go online, generally depending on who the lender is, etc. Send off a conversation, and they're usually back to you within 24-48 hours, and you can see if they've done something.
So it's like a portal that it's visible,
there,
transparent as to what's
say your incoming mortgagee, the seller,
yep.
their discharging mortgagee, etc. Everyone's in there in the one workspace,
yep.
and working together and say, well, you haven't done that yet. Can I give them a little bit of a move just to make sure everyone's working toward on time to that settlement?
Yep. I can imagine it cut down a lot of errors too. Like there were some horror stories I heard back in the old days with paperwork being done incorrectly. I remember a bank guy I knew from a bank ringing me the day after a settlement, and there was a document that was done incorrectly, and the bank actually didn't have a mortgage did not have a mortgage over the property, so they needed to do some fancy footwork and some extra. I can imagine that sort of process now is very tight.
It is very much so, because the old, say, paper base, you'd turn up, hand over a transfer document, and the banks again used to say bulk lodge. So they would wait till they have a certain amount of documents, go to the land titles office and have everything registered. Now, if something within that document was wrong, land registry pings, say, a requisition, you've settled 3 months ago, and all of a sudden you're hit with a fee, this needs to be fixed, you've got to run around, try and find everyone, and then once money changes hands and everyone moves on with their lives, can be a little bit harder to track everyone down, because they don't have, as say, vested interest as big as it was 3 months ago.
Not as important on the agenda.
So now, being electronic, it's done.
Yeah.
Documents don't get certified. It goes through Revenue New South Wales, Titles Office, etc. They've got to certify all that before we get there.
Awesome. Smoother.
I'm going to ask you a few more questions, but before I do, I'm just going to segue into this great document I had a flick through earlier on that the lads from Property Investment Advisory have put together. Scott, this is a great document for people who are just getting into the property market. It's an e-book. It's downloadable. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about it?
It is.
Yeah, it's a great guide for people who are just getting in.
Yeah, so look, I guess the reason behind that guide is that we meet with so many people on a daily basis, and there's a lot of sort of questions they have. So we thought, it would be a good way to give people free access to some information.
I'd imagine there'd be a lot of repeat questions as well throughout over the years.
There is. So we thought, we'll make a handy guide that's free, downloadable. It's on our website if you'd like to jump on there, or you can feel free to contact us. We'll give you our details at the end of this session, but there's checklists in there, there's guides, there's how-tos, there's step-by-step processes, all the things you might need to know, whether you're ready now or already down the track.
Yep, it's a great guide for people who might be thinking about it. Question for you, Justin. Let's talk about some horror stories. I remember years ago hearing a story of a lady in the UK who inherited her father's unit. He'd lived in it for many, many years. He passes away, she goes to inherit it, and then they find that he didn't actually own that unit. He owned the one next door. There were all sorts of headaches around that. What sort of problems have you seen that in your experience with things that have gone a bit pear-shaped on settlements?
It's always case to case, and there's always something. Every matter's got something attached to it, which keeps it interesting on a daily basis. So recently, had a matter where purchaser exchanged, did the cooling off period, everything looked good. We asked some questions about the property. I said, it was good. It had been converted from a garage to a house. Everything looked nice. No records. Council not great at keeping records, so he was happy, moved forward with it, did the usual searches, outstanding notices, and just come back, and the property was again riddled with notices. You shouldn't do this, you've got to take it back to how it was, you've caused damage to the property, you've got to clean the property up, so on. So the purchaser was like, well, can I get out of this? Luckily he was in a position where he could, because he was covered by legislation, and it comes back again, as I said a little bit earlier, to the front end, whereby the vendor could have, or the seller could have had him locked into that contract if he had gone down the route of disclosure. Disclose the orders, there was a problem, etc., and that locks him in. So look, the purchaser goes and factors that into any offers he makes, so on. But in that case, it was a good outcome. We'll be able to get him out of the contract. I've had a recent one as well where nice little couple luckily again took out what was called title insurance, decided to not get a survey done, etc. Had a fence which had been there for, let's say, 50 years, sitting out the front of the property, owned it for a couple of months. Council had come along then and said, we now need to put in place a new bus stop. We've got to put in a new footpath. Unfortunately, we've done a survey and it's found that 5 centimetres where we need to put the survey. In that case, we'd advised them to take out what's called title insurance. So that covered the fence being removed, rebuilt.
I was going to ask you about fences. Do you see a lot of those sort of? I mean, again, the whole survey industry was done. It was a very accurate industry, but now we've got GPS. Are there inaccuracies with fences where they're supposed to be? Someone owns a metre of land that they're not supposed to own.
Yes, still happens, especially older properties, whereby the survey in the due diligence process, which you do pre-buy, etc., has, let's say, fell away to what it was back 10, 11, 12 years ago when I first started,
Yep.
it used to be more so you'd have more time. It wasn't such a heated property market. You had a little bit more time to go through, do your due diligence, which would be going through contracts, building a best, get a survey report just to make sure everything where it was. Okay, and now as everything's got a little bit quicker, surveys are now anywhere from $800-900 to get it done. So title insurance has then come along and said we're a little bit of a cheaper version of that. Everything looks good, but if everything should go wrong in the future, we'll cover you for it.
So what's title insurance? Well, I don't think I've heard of that. So that's something that the purchaser can take out if something goes wrong.
Yeah, it's there to take care of, say, illegal building works that may have been done to the property. So you send your building inspector, he has a look around, he'll go, look, everything's structurally sound, looks good, it's not going to fall down around your head, but he doesn't specifically comment on compliance.
Yeah.
So you go to council, you look through their records. Councils weren't officially, or records before about 2005. Hard to come across, so if anything was done previously, you can go, maybe you go to the vendor, ask
This
questions.
is like the granny flat that appears in the backyard that shouldn't be there, or the
and ask the vendor, what have they got? Well, we don't know, we didn't look into it when
astronomy
we bought it. So you can go, right, we've checked as much as we can, nothing should go wrong, but we can get a survey report if you want to spend X, or if you just want to say, look, everything looks good, shouldn't be a problem, but I want something in the back of I want something in the pocket for a bit of risk management. Should something pop up 6 months, 12 months down the line, well then I've taken that out.
I'd imagine that'd be important for things like sheds too, like people building sheds in the backyard, especially on some of these large, some of these large properties.
So you might decide back to the granny flat to 6 months down, build your swimming pool. So you have to go and do that survey report, and then all of a sudden you find out, oh, hang on a minute, the garage is halfway on next door's property, and what I'm going to do about it, that could be a problem. So if you've sufficiently insured yourself against it, and it wasn't disclosed in the contract to start with, you can generally make a claim.
Good advice. I was going to ask you about swimming pools, actually. Do you see a lot of problems with swimming pools? What can go wrong there? I'd imagine they're not council approved. These days you have to get it...
So seller side of things, to go to market, you've got to, one, have the property registered, and or attached to the contract what's called a certificate of compliance or a certificate of non-compliance. So either or works to get you to market.
Right.
So they'll attach that to the contract. Generally the purchaser steps in, doesn't know much. They go, oh, that's registered, there's a certificate attached. But if it is a certificate of non-compliance, which we do see, look, every 10 matters, probably 7 don't.
Right.
Because they do change the regulations a lot. So something that complied 10 years ago might now in 2021. So that certificate of non-compliance, again, once it's attached and in place, you go ahead and exchange contracts. But in the fine print there on the certificate is once the purchaser becomes the owner, they've got to deal with the problem within 90 days.
So they don't have to. The vendor doesn't have to fix it before settlement.
No,
so they can negotiate.
So all they have to do is attach that,
and then disclose it.
A privy purchaser with a good conveyancer, generally comes along and says, "All right, we've seen the non-compliance. The non-compliance certificate will outline what the problem was, and then you can go right. We can get some quotes. We'll deal with the problems, as I said, within that 90 days and have it fixed to our liking. Or maybe a provision goes in the contract to say the seller will make sure what's done is done before settlement, and then before we settle, they provide the certificate of compliance to say the pool's now ticked off on.
Do they go back and change the price? Do they just turn around and go, well, hang on, we've made an offer based on all of this being right, so now we've got to fix the pool?
Again, depends where we're at. Okay, pre-exchange and all that comes in, you can go back and say, look, I'm willing to take this on myself, but I'm going to have to spend reasonably quickly, 5-10 grand. So let's go back and I still want to buy, but let's discuss the price. So
and post exchange, I'd imagine there might be an adjustment on the settlement.
So you might be within the cooling off period. So it's kind of hard to go back and change that purchase price. But you might go, look, it's not a significant amount, so we just go and put it in the settle adjustments where it'll come off as an adjustment when we get and do the figures.
And then just one thing on that. Sorry, Justin. It is interesting when you think about it. You know, it's the little things that add up and make a huge difference in terms of is this compliant or non-compliant. So just can you give us 2 or 3 things that, you know, for the viewers that would make something not compliant in that situation? What are 2 or 3 examples?
A lot. Fencing. And for example, fencing and having structures plant. built close to fencing and plants being deemed climbable. Okay, so a person could, or a small person, child, could climb on that to get themselves over the fence and into the pool. So you might have beautifully landscaped 10, 15 years ago swimming pool that had your nice trees there, etc. But to get it compliant, you've got to get them removed. So you might have to shave them off, take them back, which again factors into offers, price reductions, etc. Okay, sheds. So you might have carports, etc. built near that. Again, if anything's climbable, or they can shimmy up a drain pipe and get over that fence, it's deemed non-compliant. Okay, so it's a wealth of things that you might come across where, as I said, 10, 15 years ago were fine, but now they do change the legislation quite often.
It's amazing.
Yeah.
I'm just looking at a studio audience here of people who've wandered across from the pub across the road. Just had an idea that maybe a topic for that we might talk about in the future is getting a property ready for sale.
Yeah,
which is an interesting topic. That's about all I have. Just been handed a quick note. So I just had a question that's come in from John from Maitland. Do you need a conveyancer if you want to subdivide a block that you own?
You'll need the conveyancer eventually, more so at the end. So you'll go and set what you want to do up with, say, a planning surveyor. So they'll go through, do your paperwork as to how many lots you want to do, 1, 2, 3, where your easements need to be, so on. And then generally you're subdividing, hopefully subdividing to go to market and make a profit. And then your conveyancer would then step in, work with the people who've done the subdivision, etc., in relation to the paperwork, so they can put the contract together, which will generally be a subject to contract, whereby this is the dream, this is what we're going to do. We'll give, say, for example, 12, 18 months to get that done, and if so, we settle after the plan's been registered. So conveyancer more so on the contract paperwork.
Around that.
Yeah.
I can tell you, John, too, if you're going to subdivide a block, get some advice, pardon me, from a tax advisor, because there are some interesting capital gains tax issues around the sale. You might be living on a block where your house is on it, and if you sell the whole block, it's tax free if you've lived in it the whole year. But if you carve off a section and you're just selling off the land, you may actually have a tax problem that you don't know about. So,
good advice.
Liz from Newcastle has asked: is it more or less expensive if you're buying off the plan?
Well, we have fixed fee.
Solicitors will always charge.
Okay, fixed fee. So we've got fixed fee, so we don't go up and down, whether it's just a nice residential property, whether it's off the plan. Off the plan do tend to have bigger contracts, more work involved, but as I said, we're fixed fee, so it doesn't matter how big the contract is, how small, you're there, you know what you're going to get when it comes to payment and settlement.
You know how much time is going to be spent. All right, any other questions off camera? No? I think that's about it. Now, did you want to talk a little bit more about the ebook at all before we?
Yeah. So as we were saying earlier, we do have the ebook there available to you. So if you would like a copy of that, jump onto our website, piaproperty.com.au. There is a downloadable link there, so you can just download that straight to your phone or your iPad or your desktop. If you are having any trouble, please feel free to get in touch with us, and we can certainly get a copy to you. But hopefully there's a lot of value and information in there to help you. Again, whether you're looking to get started now or sometime in the future, hopefully it'll set you on the right path.
And like anything, it's a guide. So as soon as you start reading it, you're going to probably have more questions that come out of it. But I've had a look through it, and it's a terrific guide. Gentlemen, it's been a pleasure. Justin, Scott,
thanks for having me.
Yeah, that's all right.
Pleasure
I've
to be
got
here.
some very interesting things on now. I've got a few things on the to-do list now. I've got to go and make the illegal granny flat, observatory tower,
All good things.
and swimming pool legal.
All comes down to disclosure. Disclose it, you're all good.
Very good. All right, I think that's it. See you next time.
Okay, see you next time.
See you in a few weeks.